I don't care how. I'm going to be in Chicago next year, one way or another. I don't care how. I am doing it. A historical weekend in NASCAR ends with one historical winner. After a chaotic, wet, just messy, absolute chaos of a race, ends off with NASCAR's 11th international winner from Down Under. Shane Van Gisbergen, three-time Supercars champion, becomes the 7th driver in the history of NASCAR to win in his very first Cup Series start. Man, I'm in shock. I'm in shock. To give you an idea, my mom was watching this race. She ain't into NASCAR, and she even said this was a fun race. This was good. First of all, if you imagine my mom to say something exciting about NASCAR, you know you've done a good job. But holy crap, what did we just witness? First of all, NASCAR continues to prove people wrong. A lot of people were saying NASCAR in LA, they can't race at a track like that. It's going to be garbage. And ended up becoming a lot better than what people expected. A lot of people said that NASCAR in Chicago in a street race, you're going to get boring racing. Nothing's going to happen. That was an awesome race. And for a street race, it was so awesome. It was, for a track like that, presented a lot of passing opportunities, a lot of excitement, a lot of entertainment, great broadcasting all around. It was a fun, entertaining, chaotic race. But we do have to talk about a couple of issues. We're going to get to that later. But from a racing perspective, obviously, the day started out absolutely horrible. I mean, it did not stop raining until I think 4 o'clock my time, 4 o'clock Eastern time. It looked like nothing was going to be even done about Sunday. It already started off bad on Sunday when NASCAR called the Xfinity race 2 races earlier than it was supposed to get to the halfway point. Now, obviously in the rules, for a race to be official, you have to get past halfway. But NASCAR, in the rule book, NASCAR can override that. They have the power to basically, if any means necessary, they have to short it. They have to cut it shorter than normal. They have the right to do so. So that already caused some uproar. Then concerts got canceled, still continued to pour. And it looked like this race, or this weekend, was going to be an outright failure because of something that was out of NASCAR's control. Somehow we got the race in, and what I thought was going to be absolute chaos in a bad way. I thought going turn number 1, with the track as wet as it is, I thought all the drivers were just going to beat you in turn 1. But surprisingly, it was pretty entertaining. We started out with Denny Hamlin and Tyler Reddick out on the front row. Denny Hamlin was out of it on lap 2, I believe. He lost it, went into the tire barriers, and that allowed Reddick to go by. He led for a good early part of the race. And you had a bunch of other drivers that were getting into the tire barriers, like Eric Almirola spun in turn 5. Then you had a 3-car pilot with the 2 legacy cars and Brad Keselowski in turn 6. Turn 6 was a hot spot, especially with Noah Gragson. Him and Gragson and the turn 6 tire barrier are like a love story. They can never find a way. They always find a way to come together, because I'm pretty sure he ran into it 4 times the entire race. Anytime you saw Gragson, and it was always in turn 6 at the same part of the track of turn 6 at the barriers. He had just a horrible day, but there were so many other drivers that were over driving the corners, getting into the wall, and it really made for a very entertaining race because it forced drivers to be on edge. The entire race, I personally was on edge the entire race, hoping the drivers didn't overstep that boundary, didn't push it too much and go over the edge and into the tire barrier or go off course one way or another. So that part of the race made it very entertaining. Now, obviously, the transition from wets to slicks, you saw a lot of drivers that were messing up, over driving the corner, getting into the tire barriers with the drivers that made the transition to slicks early on. So everything from top 5 on back was very entertaining. Good passing. There were, some of the field was spread out, but there was some good passing. There was some good battles. But up front, not much happened. I mean, after Reddick had the lead for a little bit, he slipped up coming off of turn number 6. That gave the lead to Christopher Bell, who had the fastest car outside of SVG in this field. I mean, Bell won stage 1 and he won stage 2. So he had the car to beat at the time. What we all expected when you're talking about NASCAR on a street race, you're expecting a traffic jam, and it did happen. William Byron lost it coming into turn number 11, and then Corey LaJoie got into Kevin Harvick, created a massive stack up. And I mean, Wasn't surprising. I thought more cars were going to end up with damage, but this is one of the few issues that I had with this race, and that was the field positioning of it. You saw so many drivers that got positioned where they should not have been positioned, like Kevin Harvick and LaJoy. They were part of the accident, yet they stayed ahead of the drivers that weren't. You had some drivers like SVG that were in the top 10, got shuffled back to 11th to 15th or something like that when they weren't involved in the wreck. There was a lot of issues in that traffic jam mess up. But the biggest issue, if there's one thing you can complain about this race, was to do with NASCAR's officiating. So because the race started an hour after it was scheduled to run, darkness came into play, and NASCAR made the decision to shorten the race from lap 100 to lap 75. The issue with that is that it screwed Bell and Larson. Bell's radio was irate, trying to communicate with NASCAR. What's going on? What's happening? They're not telling us anything. Are we racing to darkness? What's going on? And NASCAR, when they announced it, screwed Bell and Larson because everyone behind Bell, Larson, those guys, they all pitted. Bell, Larson, they stayed out front because they're under the impression that they're racing to green or they're racing to the finish. They don't know what the situation is as everyone else is. And so because of that, by the time that NASCAR announced that the race would be shortened by 25 laps, all of a sudden, the drivers that pitted, that was originally going to set up for the final run, they were they were able to make it to the end. They were good to go, forcing Bell and Larson and the drivers up front to pit. And they had to start at the rear of the field because they weren't given information. They didn't know what was going on. The drivers behind them, they're on a different strategy. They pitted already, but Bell and Larson, those guys, they're up front. Track position is key. You're going to stay up front. You're going to do whatever it takes to stay up front. When NASCAR made that call, it messed up a lot of driver strategy. So that's the only complaint that I had with this race is the timing of it. I would have preferred, it gave me a lot of New Hampshire 2021 vibes where they called it with 10 laps to go. Oh, okay, 10 laps to go, we're going to call it. I would have preferred NASCAR to maybe give a time limit, like, hey, we're going to 40 minutes of racing left or something along those lines. But that was my only issue with that, was NASCAR's officiating on the timing of when they announced the race was going to be shortened. But other than that, it was phenomenal. Now, you did have some more issues in stage 3. After that happened, Bell was basically out of it. He had issues. He beached it in turn number 1, went into the tire barriers. He had a ton of issues. Truex, who had a top 5 car, it seemed as though he was going to be a front contender. He also had massive issues very late into the race. But because of those issues that Bell, Larson, the drivers up front, they got sent to the back. The drivers that already pitted, they're already good to go. Well, were drivers like Justin Haley, Austin Dillon, Chase Elliott, who was a driver that was into the barriers earlier in the race, Kyle Busch, who was the first to go into the barriers, was all in the top 5 now. But the driver that everybody was scared of was Shane Van Gisbergen. He was on 15 or 16 lap fresher tires because he pitted earlier, very late in the race. He had 15 or 16 lap fresher tires ahead of Haley, Dillon, and those guys. So it was inevitable. He was going to eat those guys up. Just had to stay out of trouble. And he was flying. He was a second and a half faster than Haley and those guys. And again, it was just a matter of time that the 91 would take the lead. And those final laps were so much fun to watch because you had Dillon and Haley battling, duking it out first and second. Dillon went over the limit coming off the final corner. He beached it, went into the wall. He then went backwards into pit lane to make sure to get out of harm's way. He ruined his race, but did give it his all to try and get a shot at the win. And that paved the way between Haley and SVG at this battle that these two drivers had, especially in turns 2, 3, and 4, where SVG went to the inside of Haley. Haley crossed him under. Haley takes the lead back. SVG faked him out, went back to the inside. It was a beautiful pass by the 91 car to fake out Haley, to get back on his inside and take the lead. It was phenomenal. But the thing is, because Bubba Wallace KO'd Ricky Stenhouse Jr. going to turn 1, that led to NASCAR overtime and go on to win at the Chicago Street Race, becoming, like I said, the first driver since 1963, I believe, to win in his very first Cup Series start. And this is a back-to-back victory for Trackhouse after they won last weekend with their driver Ross Chastain. And it was, again, just such a cool race. Again, there were some issues with it, obviously more from the officiating standpoint. But aside from that, there's not really much I have to say to complain about this race. Obviously, you had a lot of drivers making a lot of mistakes. I mean, Reddick had mistakes. He went into the barriers. I mentioned Kyle Busch went into the barriers. Bubba had issues. Stenhouse had issues. Harvick. I mean, there were so many drivers that either went into the barriers or got taken out by someone. But aside from that traffic jam in turn 11, there weren't any major accidents or like any real big time hits. You just had drivers in the tire barriers pull out, and then it'll be good to go. But other than that, no real issues in terms of major accidents, which is something I thought was going to happen. So the race was a lot cleaner than I expected, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. The broadcast, Mike Bagley, Dale Jr., NBC, those guys, they did a great job not only covering the race, but I felt like they did a great job of showcasing the city of Chicago, since if it's a street race, it's important to show off the city. And I think NBC did a great job of covering the race, but also showing off the city of Chicago in a positive manner. Another thing I want to mention is the fans, because this race weekend basically had one concert, and that was the Black Crowes, I believe. Chainsmokers, Miranda Lambert, all the other concerts got canceled. And yet still on Sunday, even though there was going to be no concerts, still on Sunday, I want to say 90-95% showed up. It was packed. When SVJ crossed the start finish line and celebrated, the fans were still there, and it was packed. I was surprised by how many people that were there in this, that were still there to show up. Even the downpour that began the Sunday afternoon, and they were still there by 8 o'clock at their time zone. And I think it showed that the fans of the people that attended this race, they came there for the racing, which I was very happy to see, because obviously there are going to be some people that be like, oh, we're here just for the concerts. But for that many people to show up still, they were there for the race. And I think they were entertained. That was a show that I'm pretty sure a lot of fans left satisfied. Obviously, there may be other things that they had issues with the weekend, but from a race perspective, from just that race, I was thoroughly entertained. I was satisfied. And judging by the reaction, I'm pretty sure a lot of the fans that attend this race were also satisfied, which means more likely than not, we're coming back next year for Chicago, and I cannot wait for it. I just hope that there's no rain. When there's no rain, I'm cool with it. But yeah, NASCAR did an unbelievable job for putting on this race that at the beginning seemed like it was doomed to fail, seemed like it was going to be an atrocity. And in the end, you couldn't ask for a better story to have a race that we had, and for a winner that we had, an international driver like Shane Van Gisbergen could bring a lot of new audience from down under in Australia, especially when you consider his post-race interview said he's got one more year left in the supercars. He was asked a question, will you come to NASCAR full time? He said he's got one more year left in supercars. We'll see. I'm just saying, with how good SVG is on the street races, and keep in mind, the next gen car is more similar to the supercars than ever before, than any other previous generation of stock cars. So, I'm just saying, I'm guaranteed you that I won't be surprised. There are teams out there that are going to be lining up for SVJ in 2025 to maybe come to NASCAR full time. In my honest opinion, you could not ask for a better winner. Outside of maybe Bubba or Daniel Suarez, I think you couldn't ask for a better winner than SVJ, for an international driver to come in and win the very first street race. A lot of people may say, oh, he just proved that NASCAR drivers can't drive. I think that's a stupid way to look at it, because SVJ literally grew up on these types of tracks where a majority of the guys have never even competed on a street race before today. And on top of that, he had 16 lap fresher tires. So it was inevitable he was going to obliterate the guys ahead. But points aside, you couldn't ask for a better winner. And I am super excited for next year's race. Next year's race, I am so excited for. And I'm going to try and be there next year, because it looked like a fun race to attend. It looked very exciting. Again, this was so not like the other street races that I was expecting to see, where it was going to be single file the entire time. Nothing's going to happen. That's what you maybe expect, or the opposite of a complete, shit show where drivers are running into barriers nonstop. You can't get a clean lap of racing in. We saw a mixture of that, which I felt like was the perfect way to have a race here in Chicago. So I've talked a lot. Let's take a look at the results. So SVG wins, Justin Haley in second, Chase Elliott and his teammate Kyle Larson third and fourth, Kyle Busch in fifth. Elliott and Busch both ran into barriers or had some form of issues, still finished in the top 5. Also, Cindric, McDowell, Logano, Ty Gibbs, rookie, and Chris Buescher, the top 10. Denny Hamlin rebounds for 11th place finish. Eric Almirola, William Byron, Corey LaJoie, Ryan Preece, the top 15. Then you got Eric Jones, AJ Allmendinger, Christopher Bell, Todd Gillen, and Chase Briscoe, the top 20. Jenson Button, he had a moment where he spun just entering pit road. He started in the top 10 finishes in 21st. Chastain, 22nd. Balicki, Keselowski, Gregson. Then Andy Lally, Daniel Suarez, he had damage late in the race. Reddick, we talked about him earlier, went into the barriers. Harvick spun late. Burton went into the barriers late. Bubba, which sent the field into overtime with his crash, was 10 outs in turn number 1. 31st. Truex, he spun 3 or 4 times in this race, finishes 32nd. Blaney also had damage. And then you see Stenhouse, Ty Dillon, Austin Dillon, and Alex Bowman. He finishes last after he had oil issues and then had his engine expire near the end of stage 2. So yeah, I'm pretty sure I said all that I wanted to say. I don't know what else to really talk about in this race. Again, there are some cons with this race. Again, the officiating is really the only thing I could really criticize about this race. For what you were expecting at a street race, I mean, I don't know if you could get any better than that. I mean, yeah, could there be more passing? Yeah, maybe, but for a street race and what we were expecting compared to what we actually got, pretty sure this race exceeded our expectations greatly. Who knows what SVJ's future is going to be? He said he's got 1 more year of supercars, and he said that this was the most fun he's ever had in a race. I'm just saying, SVJ, the door is open for you to come to NASCAR. The door is open to come full time, man. We will accept you with open arms. And Chicago, based on the reaction, I'm pretty sure Chicago has opened NASCAR, has opened up to NASCAR. There was a lot of criticism with this race before it happened. And I think after it, if you look on social media, there are a lot of people that are in Chicago that may have been into this race. They enjoyed it. And I think a lot of them are starting to come around to NASCAR in their backyard. And for a weekend that started out great, and then it looked like it was going to be a disaster, ended, I think, the best way possible. But what are your thoughts on the Chicago street race? I'm very curious to hear what you guys' thoughts on this. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more content. I will be back in my normal studio later this week, so don't worry about that. But until next time, my name is Jett from MDK. Thank y'all so much for watching. Congratulations to Shane Van Gisbergen, your winner at Chicago.